Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we talk about theo-philosophical issues, where we make a robust and rational case for Islam. And we also deal with some misconceptions and interrogations of Islam made by detractors of it. Today we're going to be talking, inshallah, about this issue of the earth being created or supposedly created before the heaven as per the Qur'an. This is the claim that many of these detractors make, and it's littered all over their websites. So what is the claim? The claim is that the Qur'an says that the earth was created before the heaven, and this is wholly unscientific, something which is primitive and something which is more indicative of a 7th century type of authorship rather than the creator of the heavens and the earth. So what are the verses that are being referenced with this kind of shubha? There are two main verses, actually two only verses in the Qur'an that they use to make this claim. The first is in chapter 2 verse 29, Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ لَكُم مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ فَسَوَّاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. That He is the one who created all that is in the earth, and then He turned to the heaven and made them as 7 heavens. And in chapter number 41 verse number 12, Surah Al-Fussilat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقَضَاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ فِي يَوْمَيْنِ وَأَوْحَى فِي كُلِّ سَمَاءٍ أَمْرَهَا. That He is the one who ordained them as 7 heavens in 2 days, and He gave to each of those heavens its affair or their command. So they say, look, it's clear here that in the first verse that we've mentioned, the creation of the earth is mentioned, and then after that, the creation of the heaven is mentioned, and therefore that shows a clear chronology. And that is not a foolish interpretation of the Qur'an, because aslan, as the default position, the word thumma, which is critical here, is usually used, as the Arabic grammarians say, lit-tarahi, or for subsequent chronology. So if something is saying, I did this, thumma this, they're saying that they did this, and then they did this afterwards, and then they did this afterwards. But the reality of the situation is that you find in the Qur'an itself examples where thumma is used conjunctively and not as or not used chronologically. So for example, if you look at chapter number 6 verse 154, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ آتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابِ تَمَامًا. Yeah, so, and then we gave Moses the book completed, مِنَ الَّذِي أَحْسَنَ وَتَفْصِيلًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ, and from the one who perfected all things and as a detail for everything. So thumma here, even At-Tabari mentions in his tafsir, does not mean chronologically subsequent. It means here conjunctive. So it works like well. In other words, it doesn't mean something is happening after something else. Thus, we know now as a principle of language that thumma can actually mean something conjunctive and doesn't always have to mean something which is successive in the chronological way. But then what do we make of those two verses that we began this video with? Well, the mufassirin, or the exegetes of Islam, are in disagreement. So for example, you'll find Qatada, one of the early commentators of the Qur'an, one of the most foremost commentators of the Qur'an. In fact, part of the Salaf is a Tabi'i himself. He believed that the heaven was created before the earth, and thus he doesn't believe the word thumma here indicates a transition or a subsequent movement of chronology. Likewise, many commentators, medieval commentators, believed the same thing. Ibn Hayyan being one of them, Al-Qurtubi being another, and obviously these individuals all lived in the medieval period, where you'll find that Al-Qurtubi takes Qatada's view and he says this is the correct view, inshallah, meaning he believes that there was no chronology indicated in these verses, and that's why actually many people like Fakhruddin al-Razi in his tafsir does not believe also that is talking about something and something else. So here you have two valid ways of looking at these verses. One of them is scientific and the other one is unscientific. Now, for all intents and purposes, if we're looking at this just purely exegetically, both of those are fine interpretations, and both of those interpretations are supported by the language. One can have an unscientific understanding and believe that the earth was created before the heaven, And one can have the idea that the heaven was created before the earth. Both of those things are supported. In fact, when Qatada was making his argument, he says in chapter 79, verse 30, وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا, that Allah, بعد ذلك, after that, He smoothed over the earth. He used this as a kind of evidence to suggest that the heaven was already there. And if we really analyze these two verses that we talked about, one in Baqarah and one in Surah Al-Fussilat, it doesn't actually say Allah created the heavens after He created the earth. And this is critical here. It's extremely important. He says, فَسَوَّاهُنَّ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ. So He proportioned them as 7 heavens. And a lot of people don't realize that as-sama', or the heaven, is ashmalu min as-samawat. Is actually more comprehensive than the 7 heavens. Why is that? Because as-sama' includes everything that is above, which could include the 7 heavens and all those things which are above the 7th heaven. And in Islamic cosmology, we have the kursi and the arsh, which are above the 7 heavens, but are included in the sama'. So thus, the sama', because in Lughat al-Arab, in the Arabic language, it means everything that is above, includes the 7 heavens and includes more than the 7 heavens. Thus, if the sama' was already created and Allah proportioned them as 7 heavens, it doesn't mean He created them after the event of creating the earth. It just means that the finalization process when it came to proportionment had taken place after the earth had already been created. But that's something completely metaphysical to us, because according to the Islamic discourse, we live in Sama' ad-Dunya, the first of those 7 heavens, because the Qur'an says, we created in Surah Al-Mulk, we made we put basically firmaments or luminaries in the first heaven, in the Sama' ad-Dunya. وَلَقَدْ زَيَّنَّا السَّمَاءَ الدُّنْيَا بِمَصَابِيحَ وَجَعَلْنَاهَا رُجُومًا لِلشَّيَاطِينِ. We have created the Sama' ad-Dunya, the first of those heavens, with masabih, which are luminaries, and we have made in pelting things for the shayateen. Thus, one can legitimately, exegetically have an unscientific approach, and one can have a completely scientific approach, if you wanted to put it this way, because it's not just Big Bang cosmology, it's almost all the theories out there would suggest that the universe or the fabric of space was created before the earth. So one can have that interpretation and one can have the other interpretation, which is unscientific. But it's unfair, it's really unfair to say that the only interpretation which exists of these verses is an unscientific one. In fact, that is an ahistorical claim, above all things, because we know that there are people from the Salaf all the way through the medieval times believed that the heaven was created first, the universe was created, you want to call it the universe, you can call it the universe, the heaven was created before the earth. And in fact, they use the Qur'an itself as an indication of that. So these are two valid interpretations. One side point, some people use a hadith which is mentioned in Sahih Muslim. And in that hadith, it says that the earth was created on Sunday, Yom al-Ahad. And then this thing was created on Monday, Yom al-Ithnain. And then this thing was created on Wednesday, which sounds like a Genesis kind of narrative. Although this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, almost all the scholars, and Nisa'i, Tirmidhi, and Bukhari himself, says this hadith is mu'allal, which means it has hidden defects, and this hadith is weak, it's rejected. And there are some hadiths, a few of them in Sahih Muslim and a few of them in Sahih Bukhari, which have been spoken about in those terms. So that hadith now can't be used as an additional kind of evidence for those individuals who want to push the scientific error narrative, because quite frankly, it's a weak hadith according to the major scholars of Islam. In summary, we can say there are interpretations of naturalistic verses which are unscientific. And this is probably one of the best cases to look at that. However, one can't just say that and stop. There are also those scholars and exegetes who interpreted the same evidence in a scientific way, or in ways which correlate with 21st century science. Thus, the exegete should be left to their own devices, and from an Islamic perspective, this is not a kufri thing. Someone cannot be a disbeliever for believing either of those things. They're two valid interpretations, but this is a specious claim if the claim is the correct interpretation is one was created before the other, because we know the language is muhtamal, meaning it's inclusive enough to include both possibilities. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.